Greetings again. Chapter 3 is all about perception, how we perceive the world, and also how we perceive ourselves, and how we make sense of the environments that we live in. It's a very interesting chapter, and if you look at the picture that I have up right now, I think it's pretty obvious that I'm standing on something, right? I'm on the top of a mountain, actually. But, if you weren't explained that, then you might think that I'm walking around on stilts and that I must be near an ocean so that I could get off those stilts safely at some point in time, or a helicopter is going to come pick me up or something along those lines. But anyway, perception can be fun, and the way our minds work, is something that movie makers, people who understand psychology and even magic will sometimes play on the ways that our mind works in order to help us perceive something different than actual reality. So let's look at a few things about perception. About is the perception steps. Basically, there are three primary actions in play when we are trying to engage in sense making. The first thing that we do is we select to pay attention to some data. We're surrounded by a lot of different things in the world, and so our mind could pay attention to any given thing at any moment in time. We've learned and been conditioned throughout our life to pay attention at key or important moments, such as when someone is talking to us, or when someone new has walked into the room, right? We'll pay attention to that. The next thing that we do in these steps of perception is we organize what we are seeing, and we try to then, as the third step, interpret that and make some kind of sense out of it. So the organization step, going back to that one, is going to be dependent on what experiences have we had in the past, and how do we view this particular situation, the person, what do we know about them, or what do we know about people like that person who has just walked into the room. We all are a little bit guilty of stereotyping, right? In part because it helps us to just make sense of lots of things around us. But we should also be wary of our stereotypes and be careful about them, because we should be aware that we do that we don't always judge things appropriately. We are stereotyping a lot of the times. We might also interpret what we're looking at based on various roles that we're playing. Your perceptions as a student walking into a classroom are very different than my perceptions as a teacher walking into the classroom. The roles and expectations of one another are different, and so that'll help me to organize what I'm looking at as well. If I came to class dressed, if we were a live face-to-face class and I came to class dressed a little bit too like a student or a child or somebody who just didn't fit that environment, it would give you some reason to interpret me differently based on what you saw. Then also there are physical constructs. How large is what we're looking at? What colors are a part of it? And then there's the psychological and emotional impact of the data that we're looking at as well. Was it said nicely or harshly, or does the person look angry, or do they look like they're happy? All of these things are going to help us organize in order to create a proper interpretation of what it is that we're seeing. Now here's a picture of either a duck or a rabbit. Actually, it's both, right? But it gives you a sense of how our mind can flip between two different meanings with one symbolic type of thing. And like I said, artists, filmmakers, magicians, they play on these perceptual tricks to get us to see something maybe slightly different than what is actually happening, what's real. All right. Some of our own perceptual tendencies, and the one that I want to talk about the most, actually, I'm not going to spend too much time on this PowerPoint. I try to keep these kind of short for you guys. But I think one of the most important ones that you can pull out of the chapter is discussion about something called attribution, which is the process of attaching meaning to behavior. And of course, we all do this, right? We've learned and conditioned various behaviors into our way of thinking, and when we see people acting in a certain way, we make judgments about what it is we see. For example, the one that I use oftentimes as an example is someone who comes late to class all the time, who is always arriving late, right? We could attach meaning to that particular behavior. Most of the time when people attach meaning to that kind of behavior, they interpret it in a negative way, right? They interpret it as being, well, this person just didn't care, or they don't really want to be here, or gosh, they just seem to be late all the time. Boy, they're lazy. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we go to. And of course, those attributions, the judgments that we make based on what we see in other people's behavior, they affect how we see other people. But they're also a tool that we could use to help us understand ourselves. Because if we judged our own attributions, we might come to a conclusion about why we tend to think that particular way, right? We have rules in our culture that we follow. We're a very monochronic culture. We learned that term in chapter 2, right? The culture chapter. Monochronic culture, meaning that we expect people to live by those timelines and deadlines. And when people don't, they're not respecting the rules. And therefore, that might be something that's really ingrained in us, and we can understand that about ourselves in part by examining those attributions. And then another perceptual tendency is one that's related to the self. We all have a tendency to use a different standard for judging ourselves than we use when we're judging other people. This is called the self-serving bias. So coming back to the example of being late, if it's me that's late, well, I know what I went through that morning. And so I'm probably not going to judge myself too harshly, because I can clearly look back and see what happened that caused me to be late, and I can just go, next time I won't do that, and I won't think anything negative. But we don't have all that information when it comes to judging other people, which is why we have a tendency to jump to that negative conclusion over a positive kind of conclusion. We're also influenced by the most obvious data that is available to us. So when we're judging other people, right, and we all do sort of judge other people. Now, judge doesn't necessarily mean negatively, right? We might judge that we actually like someone. We do so on the basis of the most obvious data that we can find. Do they look like they're approximately the same age as me? Do they look like they're friendly and approachable? Do we have some of the same interest? Can I see that and read that on the person? What is their height and weight, and whatever it is that people pay attention to, right? It varies for each and every one of us. We're all kind of socially constructed to be drawn to very different kinds of people, and we're drawn to them in part on the basis of very obvious kinds of information. All right, moving on to the self-concept. Our self-concept is a set of relatively stable perceptions that we hold about ourselves. All of us, and when I say relatively stable, right, first off, I mean that these are things that don't change overnight. Sometimes the situations in our life might actually change faster than our self-concept does. So when someone goes through, say, a divorce, there's a tendency for that person to not feel like it's okay for them to see other people, unless, of course, they were doing it before they got divorced, right? Just as a little joke there. But a lot of times people who have been, committed to someone for a long period of time feel like they're still in that relationship even months after that relationship has ended, and they can't completely move on. And that's in part because our self-concept is something that oftentimes takes a while to catch up. It's really stable. And we all define ourselves in a variety of different ways. We might use some of these different words or characteristics or traits that are listed below, our moods and feelings. So if I think I'm a happy-go-lucky person, that's one way I might define my self-concept. Some people might define themselves on their physical appearance, social traits that they have, or talents that they have. Or you can kind of make sense of the other ones as we go down below as well. Your religion, social roles that you play. All of those different things are part of our self-concept. Concept is developed in part off of, actually in large part, off of reflected appraisal. In other words, we get our self-perceptions, our self-concept from the way that we think other people view us. And our significant others are the ones that tend to offer us longer-lasting what what I want you to do in this, after getting through this section, is I want you to think about 3 people who have really positively influenced you in your life. And then take just a moment or two to think about some of the characteristics in those people that you really admire. And then ask yourself, am I attempting to be like those 3 people? A lot of times we can see when we kind of do that type of thinking and activity that we're all sort of a tapestry of woven influences of the people who have really had a positive impact on us, which is a really cool thing. Okay, make sure that you also study a lot of the terminology from Chapter 3, but here's a few more things that I want to focus in on because I think that they're valuable terms and they can kind of instruct a little bit about how I might do some of the test questions and things along those lines. But for instance, the self-fulfilling prophecy. I always think it's really important to talk about this one with college students. Our minds are very powerful things. I mean, we can accomplish just about anything that we set our minds to if we tell ourselves that we can do it, and if we take small positive actions every day to make that thing in the end happen, right? But if we tell ourselves negative things, then we're much more likely to fail, in part because we will enact the behaviors that cause us to get the negative result that we've talked about. It's sort of like if you think about a basketball player standing on a free throw line, right? And if they're standing there and they're saying, gosh, I hate taking 3 free throws, I'm not going to make this, I'm not going to make this, chances are that they're going to work themselves into nervousness and probably not be as successful in making the shot, right? But if they draw on positive experiences, I've been here many, many times, I know this shot, I can do this is easy, it's just, put the ball in the basket, it's this motion here, I'll do it. And if they, they're more likely to actually accomplish it. The same thing is true of your academic journey. If you go into a class that you maybe had failure with in the past, and you tell yourself, God, I hate this class here. A common one is math, right? God, I hate math. Right? I'm never going to be any good at that. If we take that attitude and we allow that to rule how we're going to behave and function within a classroom environment, then we're probably going to not get as much of a result from that particular class. A lot of times people get really specific. They'll say, boy, I hate that subject. I hope I just get a C in it because I want to pass it, right? But then that person is likely going to only do enough homework that will allow them to earn the C that they so desperately want. A person who comes in and actually says, okay, I didn't have much success with this in the past, but it's a new day. I have more knowledge than I had at that period of time. I can learn more. I can do more. I'm going to give it my best and see how much I can get out of it. Well, chances are you may end up exceeding your expectations because of having that kind of attitude. Image management, face work, those kinds of things in the chapter. Don't get too bent out of shape with the terminology differences. Basically, the chapter is trying to teach us that we all are in this process of keeping separate identities for different types of regions or locations or situations. For those of you who have multiple roles in life, you probably act one way around people at work. You probably act a slightly different way around your best friends. You might act a slightly different way around people at church. And you might act even another way around your children if you have kids, right? And those are basically our attempts to put on different hats, to do face work, to be engaged in image management. And that's kind of what all of that material in there is about. I already kind of addressed stereotypes for a little bit. Make sure you also study the Johari window. It basically is a good model for how we use our receptiveness and how open we are to help establish relationships with other people. And that, of course, the openness side of it makes us more receptive. So look that one over in the book. And then for the test, make sure you really focus in on those keywords at the ends of chapters because they'll really help you find the right kinds of terminology to apply to some of the answers to the questions that I will ask once the midterm exam comes up. All right, that's all for now, and I'm sure it's plenty. Thanks for listening, and I hope that you're enjoying digging into a little bit of self-perception types of discussion from Chapter 3.